Hello everyone, and oh my god, this lighting is giving me the darkest eyes ever. Anyways, so for this video, I wanted to talk about how I learned languages on my own. I know a lot of you are on a low budget when it comes to language learning, so I try to include as many free things as possible, but I also thought that some of you will want to spend more money or are ready to spend more money for language learning, so I will also include resources that you would normally have to pay for. So hopefully this video will make everyone happy. The first resource I wanted to talk about is textbooks. If you've been following this channel for a while, you know that I really like textbooks. I've done quite a few reviews of textbooks so far, and I generally just enjoy using them for my language learning. The advantage of textbooks is that you don't have to think about what to learn in what order, what vocab, grammar, etc. because the book decides that for you. Another thing that I like in textbooks, especially the modern ones, is that they don't really go into very intense grammar. Usually they give you as much as you need to get started using a grammatical concept, for example. And in terms of vocab, they also sort of select the vocab that they think you will need. Obviously, in textbooks, don't just learn blindly all the words and grammar. Sometimes grammar is not going to be relevant or interesting, at the time you're learning it. Sometimes it can wait. And the vocab is not always relevant. For example, a lot of the textbooks will talk about company vocabulary, meetings, and things like that. And that's not that these words are not useful, but if you just want to learn a language for holidays or whatever, or just for fun, then it's not really important to focus on these words, from the beginning. They can wait. The last thing that I like about textbooks is that they also include a native content. So it can be text, it can be recordings, it can be pictures of pamphlets or any sort of native content which gives you a bit of exposure to the language. Granted, it's never enough, I think, and we'll talk about other things to sort of counter this lack of native content in textbooks, but it's a great place to start. And if the textbook does come with a CD, you can use this CD to practice pronunciation by repeating what you're hearing, or you can just practice listening and understanding what you're listening. That's the point, right? I don't know why I said that. Number 2 is language lessons. I know, I said I would talk about free things, and this is another paid option, but I'm getting there, stay with me. Alright, so the point of language lessons, in my opinion, is to have a teacher that will sort of follow you, especially if you have a lesson a week or more, if you want. And that's quite useful because the teacher will be able to sort of assess what you need, they will be able to sort of have a follow-up of your progress, so they will know where you are, and also will check with you where you want to go as well, because different people have different objectives when it comes to learning a language. And I think it's kind of nice to have something that's weekly that you pay for, because I think, in my opinion, money is an incentive to being regular, because you don't want to waste your money. If you booked your lesson, you really want to attend it, and you also want to do the homework or the revision that you need to do in order to really make the most of that lesson. So I think that's quite useful, and that helps you create a habit. However, if you decide that you don't want to do weekly lessons because that's too expensive, that's too much work, or whatever reason, I think it can be also useful to have one lesson every 2 weeks or every month, for example. But I think the intention behind it should be different. On a weekly lesson, or regular lessons, you'll be able to sort of have some steady progress, you have some sort of program that you follow with your teacher. But if it's a bi-weekly or monthly lesson, then you could consider doing things like practicing a speech, getting correction on you reading a text, it can be just having a conversation, it can be asking questions, revising a specific grammar point that you find challenging, etc, etc. So it's not something linear that you would have in a bi-weekly format, for example, but it can still be very useful if you just need that help just every now and then. Number 3, apps, and that's where the free stuff comes in. So I'm not myself a big user of apps. I only use really Anki and occasionally other apps, but I don't really use any app, like one app, regularly. I like to maybe try some, go with lots of time without using apps, whatever, but I know a lot of people enjoy them, and there's lots of benefits to apps. As much as I could criticize them, I think there's definitely good reasons to use apps sometimes. Personally, I think the best time to use an app is when you have some dead time. So when you're commuting, when you just have 10 minutes to kill while waiting for a client, I don't know. And the reason is that I don't think it's useful to use an app more than 10 to 15 minutes a day. I guess the reason is that apps are repetitive and they only focus on certain skills. For example, most apps will focus on vocabulary, a bit of grammar, maybe reading and listening a tiny bit, but it's not really the real deal, you know? So if you have any time over 15 minutes to spend on language learning, I'd recommend doing other things. For example, what I've talked about so far, and also the following things I will mention in this video. By the way, I made 2 videos with app recommendations that I will link in the description box below, so do check it out if you're looking for ideas. Number 4, and I try not to use my fingers or my hands too much because sometimes I get the number wrong. Anyway, so the 4th thing I wanted to talk about is media. So media comes in different shapes and forms. It can be podcasts, it can be music, it can be films, it can be documentaries, it can be TV shows, etc., etc. Newspaper as well, you know, lots of stuff. And I think it's very useful to use media in language learning. I will say this though, I don't think it's that useful when you're a beginner, like full beginner. I mean, not to say you shouldn't use media as a beginner. I mean, I watch Japanese stuff all the time because I just enjoy the language and the sound of it, and you can still pick up some words. But I think it's way more efficient once you reach intermediate to advanced level. But the main reason I enjoy media so much is because for me in English it's been an amazing way to pick up vocab, practice grammar, practice pronunciation by listening to so much language, and many other benefits. I would even go as far as to say that a side effect of consuming media is that you will pick up words, you know, even if you're not trying to, because you will see some words so often that they will just stick to your mind eventually. And if the grammar of your language is particularly tricky, seeing a lot of examples of grammar applied in context by native speakers is also really useful to get extra practice. So that means that essentially you shouldn't just focus on grammar in textbooks as sort of like fixed rules of, you know, very isolated language. But you want to see language in context as well, so you see and know how native speakers actually use grammar and language in general in context. Does it not like blow your mind to think of it that way? I don't know, maybe I'm just getting too excited about language learning now. Number 5, and it's books. Books are an amazing way to learn. Really, if you enjoy reading, consider doing it in your target language. There's a couple of reasons why I like reading so much. Compare reading to watching a film, for example. If you're watching a film and there's a lot of new grammar and vocab, it's kind of overwhelming because there's so much you don't understand. The same thing can happen with books, but the difference is that you can actually stop, reread the sentence, look up some words, check the grammar if you're unsure, etc., etc. So it's a nice way to sort of practice the language, but in a more sort of at your own pace kind of thing. I mean, I'm not saying you should look up all the words because that becomes kind of, I wouldn't say toxic, but detrimental to the enjoyment of reading, but you get what I mean. And the second main reason, I guess, is that it exposes you to different types of vocab. So if your focus is on speaking, reading books might not be as relevant, maybe. But if your focus is also on writing and reading, then books are almost a no-brainer to me, really. And there's so many different books you can choose from, so be curious, ask for suggestions, and mainly just get started with something you enjoy and then try to expand reading other types of books on different topics and just go crazy, you know. Sorry, I'm getting so excited. But I just love books for the variety of language you can get exposed to. Number 6, is conversation partners. I will not lie to you, I'm not a huge fan of actively finding people to practice my languages with. But when in the past I found people that I could practice my languages with, it was great because you actually build, you know, real friendships and you practice your language. So that's kind of like a, what's the word? A win-win. Sorry, I couldn't find the expression. I actually saw last weekend an extreme case of I'm looking for language partners. And that was on a weekend in Saint-Malo in France. And there was a guy at a cafe sitting at his table. And there was some sort of like paper folded or like paper sign, whatever. And on it, it said, I want to practice French with you. So basically, this guy was just looking for random people to chat with him. And I think that's a great idea if you enjoy talking to strangers or just having very quick conversations with people, especially in touristy areas, because you can meet people from so many different cultures and walks of lives, and I think that's fascinating, to be honest. So I was fascinated by this when I saw it. And the last point is traveling. For most of us language learners, traveling is like the best thing ever. you've been practicing your language for days, weeks, months, or maybe years, and you finally get to practice it with real-life native speakers. Personally, I love traveling to countries where my target languages are spoken. More recently, my main focus has been Japanese, and even though I haven't been able to go to Japan for 2 years for obvious reasons, COVID, I have in the past been able to go twice to Japan, and that was amazing to be able to practice my language skills and be able to meet real-life native speakers. And even better, if you go solo traveling, I mean, depending on how safe you feel about doing that, but in Japan is definitely safe and a great thing to do, then you have even more opportunities to practice your target language because you don't have a friend with whom you will speak English or whatever other language you speak with them to distract you from practicing the language. Even better, try to avoid very touristy areas. I mean, go there if you want, of course, because they are touristy for a reason, but you know, try to go to sort of more secluded areas or sort of out of the way places, because in less touristy areas people don't tend to speak English, so that's great because it forces you to really speak. I can't even tell you how many times in Japan I was lost and I had to ask my way to people, and I had amazing conversations even though my Japanese was not that great, and it still isn't, by the way. But you know, people still are curious about you because you go to sort of like out of the way places and then kind of like, what are you doing here? You're a foreigner, let's talk. I don't know, that kind of vibe often happens in my experience. So I think it's a great reason to go to the less touristy areas. And I would even argue you get the most authentic experience if you don't go to the main capitals or main cities in a country. And that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it, and ask questions. If you have anything you want to ask me, of course, I'm always free to answer your comments. I try to always answer them. Don't forget to follow me on social media, especially Twitter. I'm very active on Twitter. And I will see you next week, hopefully. Bye.